So we just took a look at the root structure of a V2 plant, and now let's take a look at the root structure of a V6 plant. First, we'll start off by understanding why this is a V6 plant. Again, it's all about counting leaf collars from the first up to the last exposed leaf collar. And if we do that, we find out that this is the 6th leaf collar that's exposed, making this a V6 plant. The root structure on this plant is going to be very similar to the V2 plant that we just looked at, only a little more mature from the standpoint of growth stage. So again, the first thing we want to take a look at is the kernel, which is the planted seed, which we can identify as being right here. And once we've identified where the kernel is, we can then identify all of the different root structures. Again, first off, we'll take a look at the radicle, which is the first emerged root structure out of the kernel. It's the one that comes out of the tip of the kernel and begins to grow down, the first root structure to sustain the life of this plant. Opposite of the radicle are the lateral seminal roots, which come out of the opposite side of the kernel, and they again are the second root structure, and they grow down as well, the first 2 root structures out of the kernel. Coming out of the top of the kernel then is the Mezzo Coddle, which is the part that pushes the coleoptile, the emerging part of the plant, through the ground. So between the seed and the crown, we find the Mezzo Coddle. Other root structures are the Nodal Roots, which you can see toward the top of this, the Mezzo Coddle. The Nodal Roots are the roots that emerge from each of the early nodes of a corn plant and eventually take over water transportation and nutrient transportation for this plant. Once again, we can understand seeding depth by looking at the distance between the kernel and the crown and adding about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, which will tell us where that kernel was dropped. So we've just looked at the root structures of a V2 and a V6 plant and been able to identify each of the different root structures that this plant possesses. And as you can see, again, these are very important to know and understand in better understanding the agronomic principles behind a corn plant.